here in Brighton, and the focus of our retreat is new life. So we're thinking about the idea of new life, what it means to have new life, and what it means to kind of choose to engage with life, or to seek new life, and how we can go about doing that. So I work for the lay community of St Benedict, and we're a lay-led ecumenical community. We were founded at Worth Abbey, and I work for the lay community, but when I'm not doing that, I do a master's in Jungian studies. Now, whenever so it's good that some people seem to know what that is, because a lot of people, when I say it to them, I have to keep repeating myself. They're like, Jungian studies? No. So it's Jungian studies, which is Carl Jung studies. So I study the psychologist Carl Jung. Some people maybe know who that is. So Carl Jung was a psychologist in the kind of writing in the early to mid 20th century, and he was part of a sort of area of psychology called psychoanalysis, which is kind of seen as kind of the weird side of psychology by the people in mainstream psychology. It's seen as a bit on the fringe, and Jungian psychology is really on the fringe. So it's kind of really out there. But it is, I personally think, a really interesting field. So psychoanalysis is kind of that more kind of almost stereotypical type of psychology or therapy. You know, you watch a movie and there's the person lying down on the couch, and there's this person sort of writing things down, asking them about their dreams or about their experiences in life. That's kind of what psychoanalysis is. So it deals with kind of experience, especially experiences in childhood, and dreams, things like that. And Carl Jung's ideas were very much focused on the unconscious mind, so the mind that we're not aware of, and also how we share that in a way, and how we have certain ideas and symbols that show up in stories and mythology and in our dreams. So it's a really interesting field. Now, the part that gets less exciting is when I have to submit essays. And I recently had to submit a very long essay in which I looked at the influence of another thinker, philosopher from the 19th century, Friedrich Nietzsche. And at this point, Father Gabriel might be thinking, why did I let this guy speak during the 20th century? Because Nietzsche did not really have the best view of Christianity. He didn't have the most positive view of Christianity. But he did have some very interesting ideas. And Nietzsche had a big influence on Jung, and this is what I've had to talk about. Now, both of them, Jung was a bit more complimentary of Christianity, but it's complicated. He would say, this is wrong with it, this is wrong with it. But they do have a lot of similarities in the way that they view life and what life is about. And really, when you get down to it, a lot of the people who've written about this topic, a lot of the kind of commentators who've written books on what's the similarities between these two kind of philosophical thinkers, Nietzsche and Jung, is they really care about wholeness, becoming a whole person. What does it mean to be a whole person? To be our true selves. And so they both talk about you have different parts of you, parts of your personality. This is a big thing for Nietzsche and Jung. You have kind of the side of you that's maybe more intellectual and kind of things out there, and then maybe part of you that's more emotional, a part of you that's more kind of practical and wants to get on with things, and part of you that's more reflective. And some people have inclinations towards some of these parts of ourselves more than others. If you've looked into something like the Myers-Briggs theory, that's actually something that comes from Carl Jung. He didn't come up with that, but the ideas come from his thoughts. So he thought, certain people are introverts, so they prefer to be alone. Some people are extroverts, so they prefer to spend time with other people. Some people are feelers, some people are thinkers. So we have different parts of our personality. If you do the Myers-Briggs test, you get, your 4 letters. Oh, I'm an introverted sensor, feeling perceivers. I'm ISFP. I feel like everyone, a lot of people go through a Myers-Briggs phase. It's kind of a thing. I mean, I certainly did. But I think, Myers-Briggs is an example of, people kind of figuring out who they are. Who am I? But what's interesting about when you go back to Nietzsche and you go back to Jung is they didn't just say, okay, so you're an introvert and you're more of a kind of emotionally inclined person. You're someone who's more kind of someone who likes to plan things a lot and have things very structured and know what's going on. And that's who you are, and you stay like that. What Nietzsche and Jung actually both said was, over the course of your life, you need to put these parts of your personality together, and you need to develop the parts that are lacking. So if you're more of an introvert, you kind of need to make sure that you act extroverted. You need to spend time with people. If you're more of a thinker, you need to develop your emotions, and you need to kind of get in touch with those. So these different parts of your personality need to come together to make you a whole person. And I think this is something that we may have forgotten about when we look into these personality tests and things like that. So why do we forget about that? I think it's because we tend to like to put limitations on ourselves. So we say, okay, I'm an extrovert and I'm more kind of practically minded, so if I need to kind of take some time to be reflective, no, I'm not going to do that because that's not me. I couldn't possibly do that. We put limitations on ourselves, but we need to reach out and through a process, and this is the thing about Carl Jung, who was very into kind of where things are going. Some psychologists think about, okay, what's led you up to this point, what experiences led you to this point. Jung was very interested in where are things going, and the journey we have to take to get there, to get to our full, whole self. So we need to move away from putting limitations on ourselves and get there. Okay, so we want to become a full person. We tend to put limitations on ourselves, but we don't want to. So how do we stop doing that, and why do we put limitations on ourselves? Well, if we take it into a Christian context, and we take it into, if we bring God into the equation. Now it's interesting, my dad is a lecturer at a seminary, and he introduced me to a priest there who also had a bit of a background in Jungian analysis. So I had a conversation with this priest because I wanted to know kind of how do you kind of bring Jungian psychology and Christianity together, because sometimes they seem to conflict. What's the secret? And so I was ready for this really complicated answer. And he said to me, well, when you're putting it into practice and you have your therapy sessions and you do all that, you put Jesus Christ at the center and everything else comes after. I thought, okay, and he said, have you got anything else? Because I've got it. And that's kind of it. You put God at the center. And I think the reason we put limitations on ourselves is because we put limitations on God. We don't fully trust in what God can do in our lives. So this is a point where I'm actually going to diverge from what Jung says. Jung, another essay I had to do actually was on Jung's book, Answers to Job. So if you know the book of Job in the Bible, some people might be familiar with the story. There's this guy Job, and God gives him all these difficult things to deal with and challenges. And Jung's response in Answer to Job, his way of understanding that is saying, well, God's not really all that great. He's got good parts of him and he's got bad parts of him. And sometimes the good shows up and that's great, and sometimes the bad parts show up. And, Job just had to deal with the bad parts. But actually, the response that a lot of theologians gave to Jung was they said, this isn't how it works, because you have such a limited view of God that it's not just you're saying, okay, God is pretty good, but he's not perfect all the time. It's that we need to go even beyond that. There was a theologian in the Middle Ages called Meister Eckhart who said that if we call God good or loving, sometimes that doesn't even really cut it, because we can talk about ourselves as good or loving, or we can have an idea of what that is, but God is so beyond that, we can't even imagine it, and we can't really describe it in any way, because any way we describe it would be limiting it. So when we realize how far away God is in terms of how good he is, or how far above us he is in his ability to love. And this is what happens at the end of the book of Job. Job realizes that despite all the suffering he's been through, that God is so beyond his understanding that he still is good. Then we can start to understand we don't need to limit ourselves. Because if we put Jesus Christ at the center, we're no longer saying, oh, well, it's all up to me and I have this personality and I like these things, so I'll stick with that. If Jesus Christ is at the center, if God is at the center and someone who can do anything, then we can do anything and we can become the people that he wanted us to be rather than the people that we want to be. Father Gabriel's talked about humility, and I think this is a big step in humility. We might think it's sort of arrogant to say, oh, well, I can go beyond, being an introvert or a thinker or a feeler, and I can become this person who can do all these different things and have these different parts of myself working and active. But actually, what we find happens is, if we limit ourselves, we turn inwards. We say, okay, I've got this little comfort zone, and I'm going to sit in here, and I'm going to do what works for me and what makes me feel good, and I'll help people, but only to the extent that I can. But the Christian response is to go further, to move outward and to love people. I would say, as Mother Teresa says, love until it hurts. Love until you're pushed to your limits, to the limits of who you are. And in that, you discover who you really are. So when we hear in the rule things about having faith in God, having trust in his mercy and in his goodness, and having humility, we can realize that these are the things that will help us become who we really are. Not just turning inwards, not just thinking about, okay, I'm me and I'll just work with how I tend to operate on a daily basis and what I feel comfortable with. We turn outwards, we have faith, we have humility, and we look to God. Okay, thank you very much.